Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Beitzah Daf contains one Mishnah, about halfway through the Daf, and two completely different topics. The first half of the Daf is analyzing a list of Isurei D'Rabbanan that we've seen in our last Mishnah. And these Isurei D'Rabbanan are divided into three categories. The Gemara has explained already the reasons behind some of them. The Gemara will explain the other ones. Then the Gemara will question why they're divided into three categories like that. And then the Gemara will have some contradictions in a general rule that's said at the end of the Mishnah. When we get to our new Mishnah, it'll totally change topics to the topic of Erev Tchumin. When you create an Erev to extend the minimum that you're allowed to, the maximum that you're allowed to travel on Shabbos or Yom Tov, how that applies to your objects, things which belong to you, things which you borrowed, or things which you acquired on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So let's begin the Daf. We've seen our list of Gzeras which were made. The Mishnah had said that there were things which are a Shvus, things which are a Rishus, and things which are a Mitzvah. All of them, though, are Isurei D'Rabbanan, things which are Asur D'Rabbanan for us to do. Now, the last ones that we haven't seen yet, we begin on the fourth line of the page. The ones which are mitzvahs are making things hektish, different types of ways of creating hektish, makdishin, marichin, and machrimin. Makdishin is being makdish an object to hektish, possibly as a carbon. Marichin means the value of something or someone, and machrimin is making something the status of having kedusha, like a carbon. Now, why are all these things? Also, the Gemara explains you cannot do these things because it's like buying and selling. And buying and selling is forbidden on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Rashi says either it's forbidden by a pasuk in Yeshaya, Mim Sechav Sechav Bar Davar, or it's a Gzeira that you may end up writing a contract. Okay, next thing on the list is that you cannot separate Truma and Meiser. The Gemara wants to know, why do you have to tell me that? That's Pashut, that's all over Shas. You cannot separate Truma and Meiser on Yom Tov or on Shabbos because you're metaking, you're fixing those fruits which were forbidden to eat up till then. So Gemara says that here there's an extra Chiddush. The Chiddush over here is that we're talking about a case where you were planning on giving it to the Kohen right away that same day in that minute. What that changes is that it does not look like you're fixing the fruit. It doesn't have the appearance. It's not real metaking, not really fixing fruit. It's near metaking. You appear to be fixing it because you had fruit that you couldn't eat before, now you could. But if you're giving it immediately to the Kohen, it doesn't look like you're trying to fix your fruit. It looks like you're just giving the Kohen a gift. It looks like the Kohen needed some help financially to make some chas yom tov, and you gave him some fruits as a gift. Chiddush is that is still forbidden, that is still called fixing, and it is not allowed. The Gemara gives an example of how you were giving the gift on the day itself. The Gemara says as if you had bread, a dough, you separated challah, and you want to give it to the Kohen right away. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know, why is it divided up as rishus, as shvus, rishus, and mitzvah? Shvus means it's in D'Rabbanan. Rishus, Rashi had explained to us earlier, means that it's something which is a bit of a mitzvah. And mitzvah means it's a real mitzvah, but all these are a shvus. So why are you calling the first one shvus and the other two not shvus? They're all also shvus. So what we mean to say is that you have a shvus that's just a shvus, there's no level of mitzvah. Then you have a shvus on a rishus, which is a shvus on a bit of a mitzvah. And you have a shvus, which is a shvus on a mitzvah. And all of them, they're still a shvus, there's still an Esed Rabbanan involved for each of these things. Okay, now there's a contradiction. The last line of the Mishnah had said that all these shvusim, all these Isurei D'Rabbanan were said on Yom Tov. They also apply to Shabbos as well by virtue of Kal V'chomer. Shabbos has stricter rules than Yom Tov, so if they're forbidden on Yom Tov, they're also forbidden on Shabbos. But they were really applied on Yom Tov themselves. That means, says the Gemara, you won't find the shvus on Shabbos. That does not apply to Yom Tov because they were said on Yom Tov and they applied to Shabbos through Kal V'chomer. So the Gemara says, well, I have in our previous Mishnah, we have a case of an Isser on Shabbos that does not apply to Yom Tov, and that is lowering fruits through the skylight to clear them off the roof because they're being damaged by dripping rain. Over there we said you're allowed to lower them in Yom Tov, but not on Shabbos. It means that there's a shvus on Shabbos. So you see that a shvus was said on Shabbos, you're not allowed to lower these fruits because of the dripping rain. So the Gemara says it's not a kasha. So Machlok is whether you're allowed to do that or not. That Mishnah said you're allowed to do it. That is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. Our Mishnah that says you're not allowed to do that Our Mishnah, which doesn't have any shvus that's also on Shabbos and not on Yom Tov, because it does not have that permit to lower the fruits through the skylight on Yom Tov. And therefore, there is no such shvus on Shabbos that does not apply on Yom Tov. It's also to do those things equally on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Now, where do you see that Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Elazar argue about whether or not you're allowed to do this activity to save your fruits by lowering to the skylight? So I don't see that exact machlokas, but I see a similar machlokas as to whether I'm allowed to do something, whether I'm allowed to touch or move certain objects in order to save myself from a loss. What's the case? Cases if somebody's animal fell into a hole. Somebody has two animals that fell into a hole on Yom Tov. He wants to try to get them out, but he has no excuse to pull them out. What's your head to pull them out of the hole? So if you want to shachtet, then you could. So you could take out one to shachtet. The problem is these two animals are a mother and a child. You can't shech both of them today on Yom Tov. There's no way to shech them both. You're not allowed to shech two animals that are on the same day if they're a mother and a child. So Rav Elazar says you are not allowed to pull out the second one. You're only allowed to pull out one. You can shech it. You'll save yourself from monetary loss. And then you just have to feed the other one in the hole until Yom Tov is over, and then you get him out. And then there's no heter based on the fact that you're going to lose money to be able to pull him out. Now, Rav Yeshua says, no, you could play a game. Because the only issue here is appearances, and if we create a situation where it does not appear to be that you're moving something that you're not allowed to move, then it's permitted. So what could you do? So you pull out the first one, you say, I'm going to take out one and I'm going to shech it, and then when it comes out, you say, oh, look at this, I didn't realize it's not high quality. I mean, you know what? I'm going to pull out the other one and shech that one. And that way you shech one and you get both of them out. Now, again, it's a game, it's a trick, but it's not forbidden. It's actually allowed because you are just avoiding the appearances of something which is usher. Now, says the Gemara, since Rabbi Yeshua says that you're allowed to save your money, so Rabbi Yeshua would also say that you're allowed to save your fruits, you're allowed to lower it through the roof on Yom Tov. Rabbi Elazar says you're not allowed to save your money by pulling both animals out of the hole, would say you're not allowed to lower it through the roof. So the Gemara says, how can you compare these two? These are two totally unrelated machlokes, and just because you have machlokes in one of them doesn't mean you have machlokes in the other one at all. It could be that in the case of the animals in the hole over there, the one who says that you're not allowed to save it is because there's another option. You could feed it in the hole, but your fruits on the roof are going to get destroyed. There's no other option. And the other way as well, the one who says that you could pull both of them out, that's because there's a heter way to pull them out. You could do an arumah, you could do a trick. And it does appear like you're not doing anything that's not correct on Yom Tov. It doesn't look like you're trying to save your money on Yom Tov. It just looks like you've created the appearances of really trying to do a shechita. However, as far as the fruits, there's no way to make it look like you're not just trying to save your valuables. It's clear that that's what you're doing. And therefore, there's no heter, perhaps. So each one, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, and that machlokas do not necessarily have to hold of this machlokas which you're creating here as to whether or not you're allowed to lower the fruits through the skylight. Therefore, you have no proof that such a machlokas exists. You cannot say that the Mishnah that says that you're allowed to lower the fruits doesn't hold like this. Our Mishnah that says that any gzeira which applies on Shabbos applies on Yom Tov as well, and therefore you're left with our original kasha. Contradiction between this Mishnah, our previous Mishnah, and this current Mishnah. So the Gemara says no. Again, it's still a machlokas, but it's not Rav Elazar and Rav Yeshua. It's a machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, because we still see a machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, which I can relate to this machlokas. What's the machlokas Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai? The machlokas Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, are you allowed to carry on Yom Tov something which is not L'tzarech Yom Tov? Beis Shammai says you're allowed to. Beis Hillel says you're not allowed to. The example there is a child, a lulav, and a sefer Torah, and a Rosh Hashanah. Says the Gemara, since Beis Hillel says you're allowed to carry, they would also say you're allowed to move muktzah. Beis Shammai would say you're not allowed to move muktzah unless it's L'tzarech Yom Tov. So this case here of lowering the fruits through the hole is moving muktzah. You don't really have a reason to move that. It's not that it's muktzah, it's that you don't have a reason to move it. So there's no heter for you to move it. It's not a tzarech yontif to move it. Therefore, even though it's not a muktzah object in and of itself, the heter to move things is only l'tzarech yontif. So therefore, Beis Shammai will tell you you're not allowed to move that. And therefore, Beis Shammai would be the opinion who says here at the end of our current Mishnah that there is no Isser on Shabbos that does not apply on Yom Tov, because you're not allowed to move those things through the skylight on Yom Tov either. So where it says, just because, how do you know to compare the two? Just because they say that you're not allowed to carry unless it's l'tzarech yontif, how do you know that they would say that you're not allowed to move l'tzarech yontif? So Gemara says because the Isser of moving is just because it's the first step of carrying. That's why there's an Isser of moving Shalei L'Tzarech in the first place, and therefore the two things are really one Shita. Okay, this concludes the Gemara. Now we get to our next Mishnah. And the Mishnah discusses the concept of a Ruvei Tchumen. An Erev Tchumen works as follows. Every person has a Tchum that they're allowed to travel on Shabbos or Yom Tov, and that is 2,000 amos away, up till 2,000 amos away from the place that they are Konesh Visa, the place that is their place of residence for Shabbos. If it's a city, it's in the entire city, and you get 2,000 amos past the borders of the city. If it's outside the camps, then you have a 4 amos space, and after that, you get your 2,000 amos. Now, you can move your circle by creating your place of residence somewhere other than where you actually are. You can place an object, some bread or some food somewhere, and then that becomes the center of your circle. So you could actually begin Shabbos or Yom Tov with yourself not in the center of your circle. You could be on one edge of your circle, and then you can go 4,000 amos to the center. You could then go 4,000 amos in one direction. If your Erev, if your new center is 2,000 amos away from you, you can go from yourself to the Erev. That's the center of your circle. That's the place of your Shvisa. That's the place of your residence. You can go 2,000 amos past that to the other end of the circle. First question is, what is the Tchum, what is the circle limit of your objects, things which you own? And that is what the Mishnah begins, and we'll get into a number of different scenarios here. So, the Mishnah says, somebody owns animals or kalim, objects. Those animals are limited to his personal tchum. Now, if somebody owns these things and he gives them over to his son, or if it's animals to his shepherd, they still are limited to his personal tchum. Since they began Yom Tov in his possession, they establish their permanent residence, as it were, as his permanent residence. He is their owner and their controller, and therefore they're limited to his tchum, not the tchum of the son or the shepherd. Now, if you have a couple of people in a family that owns objects, so if an individual in the family has his own objects, then it's limited to his personal tchum. If there's a household with a number of people in it, let's say you have a number of brothers together, and they own an object together, then it is limited to all their tchumen. So the only place this object would allow to be is an area which is in the overlap of all their tchumen. It cannot leave the tchum of any of them. Now, what happens if somebody borrows an object from his friend before Yom Tov? So he's the owner, as it were, he's the controller, and when Yom Tov begins, it follows his place of residence, it's within his tchum. If he borrows it on Yom Tov, then it began Yom Tov in the possession of its original owner, and it follows that tchum. Similarly, if a woman is cooking or she's making a dough, and she borrows spices, water, or salt from a friend, or maybe from 3 friends, then the pot of soup that she makes, or the dough that she makes, is limited to all the owners of all those 3 things, because the dough now contains all those 3 items, and each one has its own limitations. She's only allowed to move the soup or the dough to an area that is included in the overlap of all 3 tchumen of all 3 owners. Now, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees on that. Rabbi Yehuda says the water doesn't count, because when you have the dough, you don't see water, and therefore it's not significant anymore, and it's not worth anything. The Gemara will explain what's the story with the salt. Why is that considered to be significant? Okay, that's the Mishnah. So the Gemara now begins, and the Gemara says this Mishnah doesn't fit with Rabbi Daisa, because you have a Bryce in which Rabbi Daisa, or possibly Abba Shaul, says as follows: somebody who buys an object, an animal from his friend, before Yom Tov, even if he doesn't take possession of it until Yom Tov itself, the fact that he bought it, the fact that he transferred, that he took title of the object before Yom Tov began, means that it has his tchum. Same thing applies to somebody who gives his animal over to a shepherd. If he gives it over to the shepherd on Yom Tov, it still has the tchum of the shepherd on throughout Yom Tov, because he was planning on giving it over all along. Just like the person who bought the object was planning on taking possession of it on Yom Tov, the owner was planning on giving the animal over to the shepherd on Yom Tov, in the case of the shepherd, and therefore it has the shepherd's tchum for the entire Yom Tov. That conflicts with our Mishnah that says that if he gives it over to a shepherd on Yom Tov, it has the owner's tchum. So Gemara says there's 2 different situations. One is where there's only one shepherd in the town. There, you could assume he's going to give it to that shepherd and has a shepherd's tchum. If, however, there are multiple shepherds in the town, you don't know which shepherd he's going to give it to, so you cannot use either of theirs. You have to go with the tchum of the owner at the time that Yom Tov or Shabbos begins, and that is therefore the established tchum for these animals. So the Gemara says, if you look at the Mishnah carefully, it says he gives it to his son or to the shepherd. That implies there's options. And that's what we're trying to say, that you have multiple options. There you cannot use any tchum other than the owner because you don't know what's actually going to happen with it. Now, a very similar Gemara, the Gemara says that Rabbi Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that halacha is like Rabbi Daisa. The Gemara asks, how could Rabbi Yechanan say that? Rabbi Yechanan always passes like a Stam Mishnah, and our Stam Mishnah says different. The Gemara said, like we've said before, because our Stam Mishnah says that it has the halacha of the owner, not the shepherd. The Gemara answers, this is talking about where there's one shepherd, that's talking about where there are multiple shepherds in the town. Same answer that we said before. Okay, now the Gemara brings a Beitzah, which has a similar related halacha. Beitzah says, if two people borrowed a garment together in partnership, they borrowed it from the owner. And their plan was as follows. One is going to wear it in the morning to the Beis Medrash, and the other one is going to wear it in the evening to go to the Suda. So the halacha is that it's limited to the tchum of both of them. It's only allowed to be in a place or be worn to the edge of a place in which their two tchumen overlap. Their two concentric circles overlap. If they don't have the same tchum, they cannot go to the edge of one tchum if it's outside the tchum of the other. Now, what happens if they have two totally different tchumim and they don't overlap at all? Their tchumen are 4,000, or their makom shvisa, their center of their tchum is 4,000 or more amos apart. So then you won't be able to move it at all. It's outside its tchum, or it does not have any place that it could move in the tchum, and therefore it'll be stuck in that exact spot. Okay, now the Gemara launches into another example, which is going to take us into the concept of breira. Breira, as we've had many times, breira means that you have a scenario in which it's not defined. You're pointing to something, but you don't know yet what it is. It is not recognizable what it is. You would like to apply a halacha to something, and it'll be revealed later what it was you were referring to, but at the current time it's unclear. So we discuss two cases where people bought something in partnership and they split it. So they each have their own thing. So you have where two partners bought a barrel of wine and they split it later and they each got their own wine. Or two partners bought an animal and they slaughtered it and they split it and they each took their piece. Now the question now is, each one went home with his own piece, with his own part of the wine and his own part of the animal. Is his portion now limited to the tchum of the other partner? Because at the time Yom Tov began, it was all in the barrel, and at the time Yom Tov began, the entire animal is whole. So is it limited? So the Gemara says, Shmuel says, yes, it's limited. It was all together, and therefore each person is not allowed to move his chelek, his portion, to an area which is outside the tchum of the other partner. Because when Yom Tov began, it was limited to his tchum. We didn't know which wine was which, right? When Yom Tov began, the barrel of wine was together. You didn't know whose wine was whose, even though you found out later whose was whose. But still, it's limited. Now, says the Gemara, Rav says there's a difference between the barrel and the animal. In the case of the barrel, each one is not limited. Each one can bring his wine wherever they want, and to his own area of tchum, even if it's outside the tchum of the other partner. In the case of the animal, though, he is limited to the tchum of the other one. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. It's either yesh breira or ein breira. If you hold yesh breira, that means that at the time that they bought the barrel of wine, each partner owned his own wine. Now, I couldn't tell yet what he owned. I couldn't point to it, but later when it was divided, it became clear that each one owned the actual wine that was later divided. That's what he owned. While it was mixed, he only owned that wine, and therefore he only owned that wine when Yom Tov for Shabbos began. That wine was limited to his tchum, not the other person's tchum. That would be if you hold yesh breira. The problem is, then, why don't you say the same thing for the animal? Each person owned his piece of meat in the live animal. Whatever meat he owned, whatever meat belonged to him, that became limited to his tchum when Shabbos and Yom Tov began, not the rest of it. So my answer is yes. Really, Rav holds yesh breira. But there's a different problem in the case of the animal, and that's that each part of the animal gets nourishment and nutrition from the other part of the animal. Therefore, in his part of the animal now contains actual nutrients that was in the other person's tchum, the other person's object. And therefore, those things are limited to the other person's tchum, and he cannot move them to his current tchum Now, so Gemara has a kash on this. Gemara says, then why don't you say it's muktzah? If he has parts of the other person's animal, so then you should have the halachas of muktzah. If those parts were muktzah, or in a situation like this where each one says, you can't touch my part of my animal is mine, your animal is yours, my animal is muktzah to you, your animal is muktzah to me, or your portion is muktzah to me, so then you should have a muktzah problem if it's taking nourishment and nutrition from the other person's animal. So the Gemara asks that kasha, and the Gemara leaves that quiet. The Gemara doesn't respond. Now the Gemara says, what is a halacha? And this Machlokas Rav and Shmuel, which is about yesh breira or ein breira. Someone says Rav Hoshaya paskin yesh breira. You could say that there is breira, which means that at the time the Yantav began, each person's chelik belonged to him, even though we didn't know which one it was, and that is the only part that was that chelik was therefore only limited to his tchum, not the other person's tchum. Rav Yochanan, however, said ein breira, and therefore it's all considered to be mixed together. They own it in partnership. When Yantav began, the entire thing was limited to everybody's tchum, and you're only allowed to bring it to where it's overlapping. Now the Gemara has some kasha on this though. The Gemara says, is it really true that Rav Hoshaya holds that there is a concept of breira? And the Gemara is going to go into a lengthy discussion about a house with a corpse within it. The halacha is that when you have a corpse, when you have a piece of dead in a room, everything in the room is tamei tamas oel. Not only that, but anything within the thickness of the doorway or of the windows are also tamei, unless you know that the body is going to be carried out through one specific window. Then only that window is tamei, and any objects in that window space or that doorway are tamei. All the other doorways are not tamei. They're not considered part of this tamei, and anything in those objects are not tamei. So now, it says in Mishnah, we have the dead in the house. Everything in the windows or the doors is tamei, unless you go ahead and you plan to take the mace out, to take the body out through one of the doorways or one of the windows. At that point, that window is tamei and everything else is tahar. Machlokas Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is what happens if you only decided which window, you only plan to take it out of one window after the person died already. Beis Shammai says it's too late. It already became tamei. Everything is tamei. Everything that's there is tamei. Beis Hillel says no. From the moment now that you've decided which one it is, that's the entrance way that the mace is going to go out through. That's tamei, and everything else is tahar. And Rav Hoshaya explains that this machlokes is only about things which will be put in that window from now on forward. And Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai both agree that anything which was in the window before is tamei for sure, because the tumah was certainly there. All the windows were tamei. When the mace when the person dropped dead and had not yet been declared, had not yet been designated which window or which doorway the body was going to go out through, all the windows were tamei, and any object which was in the window space or in the threshold of the doorway, those are tamei already. That's what Rav Hoshaya says. The only discussion is going forward. So if you put some kli in there now, going forward, Beis Shammai says all the windows are tamei. It doesn't help that you now decided which one you wanted to go out. And Beis Hillel says no. From now on, all the windows that are all the windows that you know the mace will not go out through, they are all tahar now. So you see, Rav Hoshaya is certainly holding ein breira, because if there was yesh breira, so then when we find out which window the mace is going to go out through, that was all along the window that the mace was going to go out through. We just didn't know. If that's true, so then the windows that the mace was not going to go out through should be tahar. They were never tahar in the first place. Even before I designated it, that was never a window that the mace was future going to go out through. I just didn't know it at the time. That's what yesh breira would say, but Rav Hoshaya says nobody holds such an opinion. That means he holds ein breira. Yet, we are saying here that Rav Hoshaya holds the yesh breira. So the Gemara says you have to switch the opinions. Rav Hoshaya is the one who holds ein breira. Rav Yochanan is the one who holds the yesh breira. The Gemara says not so fast. We will show you that Rav Yochanan does not hold a breira either. Rav Yochanan says if two brothers split up an inheritance, it's considered to be something that they purchased from each other. It means they inherited it together, and they split it, and each one said, I'm going to sell you your half in exchange for my half, which I'm purchasing from you. That's what it is. The significance of that is that when Yovel comes around, this is property that they purchased from each other because they inherited together and they each sold the other one's half in exchange for their half. They have to return it when Yovel begins because it's a sale. If, however, you would say that when at the moment that they inherited it, they only inherited the part which goes to them, then they each own their property as an inheritance, not as a sale. Inheritance doesn't go back in Yovel. But Rav Yochanan, though, says that it does go back in Yovel, and that means that he holds that it was a sale. That means that there is no breira. Someone says, well, maybe Rav Yochanan only says it on a deraisa issue like Yerusha, but on a derabanan issue like Tchumen, maybe he holds that there is breira. Someone says that can't be either, because we have another example in Tchumen where Rav Yochanan holds ein breira in Tchumen as well. What's that case? Somebody wants to make a tchum on the side of the city where the chacham is coming, and he doesn't know which side of the city the chacham is coming to. So he says, you know what, I'm making my tchum on the part of the city that the chacham is coming to. I don't know where. When I find out when the chacham came, then I'll know where my tchum is. And on that, there's a kasha over there that Aya asks to Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yechanan's determination is that this only works if the chacham has already arrived. This person doesn't know. So then he could say, wherever the chacham came to, that's where my tchum is. But if he hasn't come yet and he wants to say, I'm making it on a certain side, and I don't know which side, and I'm not going to know until the chacham actually shows up, that's breira. And Rav Yochanan says that can't be the case, and he clearly, therefore, does not hold of breira. We'll see the Gemara's next offered answer on that one.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.